Hello, everyone. I'm here with my friend Sul, and we are coming back together for our third talk on Ceres. So we did our first conversation on Ceres, first introducing the archetype, then when Ceres was first squaring the nodes much earlier in this year, and now Ceres is leaving Capricorn and soon to join Pluto. And we have a lot to share about this. We're going to speak about the Ceres Pluto cycle, what it means for Ceres and Pluto to be joining in Aquarius. There's a lot of rich, layered content that we're going to explore here today. So very good to be with you again. Will you
Yeah.
start us off with just sort of brushing us up on how you work with and how you understand the Ceres archetype? And we'll start from there.
Well, I always look at Ceres in the birth chart as some form of connection, like connective tissue. Ceres was she's known as the Mother Earth. She was a nurturer. She was a single mama. She was a mother. And she has something to do with nourishment and parenting, actually, and how we feel safe and secure within ourselves. So we tend to look at these aspects together with the moon, together with Pluto, and together with some of the other emotional archetypes in the chart in order to get a better picture of what's going on in an individual's capacity to connect with other people and to feel safe in themselves. So there is definitely a mothering, nurturing quality to Ceres. And I've been very obsessed with the myth of Ceres because she used to be called Demeter back in the days. The Greeks called her Demeter, and there was this big Demeter cult, which was basically an initiation into death and life. And her own mythology has to do with her losing her daughter, Proserpina. Not losing her daughter was actually abducted. So, and by none other than Hades or Pluto as we know him. So this Persephone, Proserpina myth is something that uh, that explains a little bit about the initiation into the underworld, into our own psychology. And she's, of course, tied into her mother in one way or another. They used to be one and then they were separated. So, from Sarah's perspective, it tells us something about what life does to us when we go through cycles of maturation and when we move from innocence, childhood, into the world, where we face or potentially face Pluto, these powers that can bind us. There is something with being entangled into darkness, having to deal with your own psychology, having to deal with everything that an adult life throws at us, and where we cannot depend on that mother. Like we have to find it in ourselves in one way or another. And it also means that there is a level of trauma involved in the mythology of Ceres. I mean, Ceres herself loses completely her sense of identity when she loses her daughter. She goes into grief. So there's an aspect of grief that I think other archetypes rarely touch upon. There's like this descent where, you lose something, there's a loss. And we can't deny that life is also death. So, and the mythology of Ceres is tightly connected to Pluto. So there is something with that has really fascinated me because it's so important in people's lives. I mean, these are the things we really work on when we work on ourselves. Trust issues. Can I trust life? What happens after I've experienced loss and trauma? How does life in a way change us because there's so much violence and brutality and loss, and it's all these darker aspects of life as well. We can't, we move from this Neptunian la la land and innocence and childhood, very Sun Neptune energy, and then suddenly boom, we meet Ceres, and Ceres is another cup of tea. Her story is very intense. And even though she returns, there's this ascending as well. There's the descent into the underworld, and then there's an ascension as well. It never really changes back to what it used to be. Persephone has to return to the underworld for 6 months every year, and her mother grieves her loss. Nature, then, like, that's how they explained how the trees, died, and everything in nature has that cycle. And that's the way they explained it, that life is death, death is life. Out of these dead leaves, new life comes, So there's like this constant fertilization of death and life in life. And Ceres mythology is very tied into that. So I've been looking at these things when I've been studying and researching Ceres, and what I've discovered is that it's not an asteroid, it's a dwarf planet. So I'm very passionate about that because it is categorized as a dwarf planet. Interestingly, it's the same category that Pluto, it shares that status with Pluto after Pluto got demoted. And that even further ties them in together in a way. And for me, it's very important that we start using Ceres in astrology. At least that's what I'm trying to teach my students. And like, I'm always making it a habit of like putting in the glyph everywhere, because it offers such a huge refinement to our understanding of how we connect with each other, how we feel safe, what it is that we need, how we nurture ourselves, how we nurture others. That's among some of the things that it reveals. But it's also, if you are a therapist and you're looking to kind of like see what the type of trauma people carries, or yeah, how to help, Ceres can help a lot in revealing what it is what's required in order to heal the anxiety that sometimes occurs after traumas. We have to return to life, so to speak, even though things happen to us. And it is a journey, that's the beautiful thing with Ceres, is that it is a journey. You go through all the stages. So it's very much tied into these stages of healing, where you return to life again. And even though you will never be the same, you will still be, in a way, in a sense, reborn. So, yeah, so that's what I find wildly fascinating.
One thing I heard you teach once about Ceres is that it corresponds to this archetype of feminine initiation. And I
Mm,
just, I love that because there are so many initiatory archetypes in astrology, but this one really seems to be about a process that really asks us to move through the inevitability of change. And this is why I also love, I'm mystified by Pluto and Ceres being on the same level. It's just
mm,
amazing, right? Of course, as an evolutionary astrologer, Pluto is such an important part of my work. And it corresponds from an evolutionary perspective. Pluto is evolutionary necessity, which is change,
mm,
ongoing cyclic process of evolution. Everything ends and you start a new cycle. But it's like I'm beginning, as I've been, exploring series, which it really began. For those that haven't seen our earlier videos, please check it out. There's a wealth of information on series. So we spoke a little bit about this, but when I began really looking into it earlier this year, I began recognizing that Ceres is like this natural counterpart to the Plutonian process of evolutionary necessity. That change
mm,
has to happen, but there's this way of being with it, and there's an intelligence to it. And I like to think that the promotion of Ceres to kind of be on the same level of Pluto that was also demoted says something about what's being birthed in the collective consciousness right now. This deeper respect for the actual internal emotional process of coping with change. And, one core
mm,
quality of Ceres is absolutely, you're saying we have to return to life. There's
mm,
this way that we learn with Ceres to cope with and provide nurturing and care to sustain life in the
mm,
midst of conditions that are just different. And we've seen this in many chart examples, situations where there's, you know, some sort of lacking or loss, and Ceres comes in, and that's where there's some kind of sustenance or provisions that are being offered. Something that allows us to continue to move on with life, even though it's difficult, even though there's been fundamental change. So there's such an intimate, I wouldn't call it marriage. Pluto is definitely not in that kind of relationship with Ceres,
Mhm.
it's like almost, I don't know if in the mythology they've ever like sat down to have tea, right? It doesn't seem like
Mm.
they've ever become buddies, but
Mm.
they're a pair. They're inextricably drawn and connected to one another, and I just think it's so powerful, and that's why this is an exciting time. Both Ceres and Pluto over this last year plus individually have both squared the Libra Aries nodes. So
Mm.
maybe we can just show everyone the astrology
Yeah.
and then we can continue this discussion.
Can I just
Please.
mention one little thing before it disappears from my brain? It said, like you said, it was a union, or like a pair, Pluto and Ceres. You can also look at it as a triad between Proserpina, the daughter, the innocence, and then Pluto, and then Ceres. I mean, Pluto is the soul's kind of need for evolution. Ceres might explain a little bit how we resist that evolution by being so attached to the status quo. I mean, I want it to be me and my daughter forever. She kind of lives in a little bit of denial because her daughter is coming of age. She wants that, bliss. You have small children, you know what bliss they bring. It's like everything is so innocent, everything is clean and fresh. These children are bringing in so much light, and that's the thing she was attached to. She was attached to that bliss state and she wouldn't want that change. So she's very stubborn in that sense.
Do you work with Persephina in charts? Do you
No, I don't. I look only at Ceres. I see her as well,
is
I've
Persephina an asteroid or is it
it
is there an actual asteroid?
yes, there's an asteroid. I'm not sure if it's Proserpina or Persephone, but it
Yeah,
would be pretty much the same archetype.
yeah,
No, I don't look at that, and probably I should, but I tend to keep my soup a little simple. I don't want to add in
good.
too many ingredients, and it's just to kind of like be able to focus. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
That's a really fascinating point. I mean, it makes me curious to just start maybe when I have the inspiration to begin looking a little more at that asteroid, that triad. Um,
Yeah, yeah. All
so
right. This is last year.
this is last year. I actually wanted to pull this up first because this is when Ceres was on the south node in Libra and
Mm-hmm.
Pluto was squaring the nodes. And I think the
Mm.
larger context can really, I mean, there are a greater subcontext that we'll speak about in a moment. Um, but this is a helpful starting point, at least for this current, Pluto and Capricorn cycle. You're just progressing it forward. I'm wanting to point out Pluto square the node. So that's really speaking to that tension of dealing with these core dynamics of change. And of course, that Pluto square the nodes was also the initiation of that Libra Aries axis that we've been in and are soon to complete.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Move this forward, you go into March of this past year, you can see March, April, Ceres was moving into and passing an exact square to the nodes.
Mm.
And Ceres was moving retrograde along with the nodes moving retrograde. And you can see that basically Ceres has maintained a pretty solid square
For a
throughout
long
most of
time.
this year, right?
Mm.
So this is where we are now. And we can see that Ceres is moving direct. It's leaving the square to the nodes and gradually moving to join Pluto. Right? So they're both entering Aquarius November, December, and they join each other, I believe, in December.
Yeah.
At that time, actually, Ceres and Pluto will be trining the south node. So what's really interesting about that, also just provide a little more of a subcontext, you were pointing out to me before we started the recording, and I didn't think about this. This is fascinating. That Ceres and Pluto were last joined at 22
Mm.
degrees Capricorn in January of 2020.
That's when the cycle began last time. So the last square between the first chart you showed with the 20 Libra series, square Pluto, square the nodes, that was the last square for that cycle.
Right, right, exactly.
And this particular cycle, like I call that, well, I know it's probably something I shouldn't say online, but I
Yeah,
remember talking to to a friend of mine around this time, and we didn't know COVID was going to be that huge. We heard about it. There were rumblings, and we spoke, and he's a very clairvoyant man, and he was very easy to understand. He wasn't complicated like or wordy. He's an Aries, and we talked about, what do you think? It was a little bit before this time. What do you think this new next year is going to bring? And I said, well, looking at the astrology, and I was mostly thinking of Saturn Pluto conjunction, it sort of gives me the same feel as the world wars. That's what I said, because Saturn Pluto is very, very highlighted in the charts for both the world wars. And then, so that's what I think. He said something quite different. He said, I think people are going to be angry and they're going to act really immature. Or he actually used the word children. They're going to act like children. And in a way, we were both right, because this is such a huge stellium in Capricorn, this Ceres Pluto conjunction as well. We know what's going on in the world now. Just after COVID, there's been two huge, very, very painful conflicts on Earth that we are still observing. So we are at the end of this cycle between Ceres and Pluto, and my hope is, of course, I say like, okay, any world war is like 5 years plus minus. So I'm hoping that we can start to see the end of that now, like there will be some positive changes in the right direction for the people and all of us, because we're all in this soup together. I mean, even if we're not vocal about it, I think about it a lot. I suffer with. It's
So I note
painful.
that this is Ceres Pluto Saturn, and they're all
Mm,
separating from the south node, and that this
yeah.
cycle is completing pretty much at a square to where the nodes were. So it's
Yeah.
short of a full 5-year cycle from this Ceres Pluto conjunction
Mm,
until the next series, which is going to happen December 8th. So just about five
mm.
years. Um, it, it-
Just about 5 years, yeah.
and and it looks like, so that's about, at least during this time of Pluto's orbit, around every 5 years, Ceres and Pluto will start a new cycle. So we
Mm.
probably had a few solid Ceres Pluto cycles while
Yeah.
Pluto has been in Capricorn.
2015, we had one.
Okay,
That, and then probably 2010, right?
right.
So yeah.
So here's where I'm, inquiring. I'm curious what thoughts you have. How would you define the essence of this cycle, this Ceres Pluto cycle that we're now bringing to completion?
Wow, that's a huge question. Yeah, well, the essence, I mean, there's definitely some sort of purging going on. There's all these ancestral wounds that are coming to the surface, and that's been haunting us for quite a while. Not only, the Middle East, you have all these conflicts and these ancient alliances and everything that's going on there, but Ukraine, old USSR stuff coming up, and Soviet Union, this old thing. And then you also have a lot of stuff, let's in where you live, like in the United States, that has been extremely vulnerable time for the United States. There's all these things coming up that relates back to the 77
Mhm, mhm,
sixth chart, where Pluto is at 27 degrees Capricorn, and it's the beginning of the United States. It's the Declaration of Independence. And there's all these racial issues. You have there's like this feeling you get when like people have been starting to talk about it as well, that civil war and, will California break out and stuff like that. There's this huge, like, it's very vulnerable time. It's these deep-seated anger issues and loss and betrayal and traumas happening right now. So I believe our collective psyche is pretty exhausted by everything that's going on. And there's also another thing that I've been thinking about that is not related to nations or cultures, but it's very much related to Ceres. It's our basic sense of security per se. Like if we don't have an Earth, there's no Earth B, right? There's no second Earth. And We see now that during the last 4 years, 5 years, especially since the onset of this huge global pandemic, people have been more into health and healing themselves and, getting more in tune with nature, eating more healthy. It's becoming evident that we eat a lot of poison and that our agriculture, cultural traditions right now it's a lot of monoculture. There's like obesity slash undernourishment, like this really like hyper processed foods and the industrialized food industry and stuff like that. The people are really not in tune with their bodies and their and nature in a good way. And that's one of the things that Ceres is very like pronoun important with, like the body, the connection to your own needs, the connection to your in a kind of like nurturing, self-nurturing way. So very often when we see Ceres in by progression or by transit in a chart, there is an experience, there can be an experience of loss, like a divorce, something like there can be like a natural disaster coming in and taking your house. And we recently had Helena, which really was devastating for a lot of people. And that was, I mean, Pluto and Ceres are pretty much in the same signs. Ceres was squaring the nodal axis. It feels to me that we're all, there's like an awakening going on. Pluto in Capricorn is by, for sure, a very an initiation into our collectiveness, that we are one. We are, like, whether we like it or not, we are, of course, torn apart by cultural and racial issues and or class issues and stuff like that, poor versus rich and stuff. But you know what? The weather's not going to care about that. So back in the days, Ceres was considered to be the patron of sacred law. She was the kind of like, well, day follows night, and you have to go to sleep and you have to get up. There's like a rhythm. We're all going to get old. You have to age with grace. And every time you have to give yourself an opportunity to grieve a little bit. And that would be a natural rhythm because we're mammals and we have emotions and we attach to each other and we grow old, so we have to kind of find a way to live in harmony with those cycles and with each other so that we don't go into destruction and mayhem, which we pretty much have seen the last couple of years. It's like, this is what happens when we're all under pressure. Like when we are not feeling safe, when we are feeling attacked, when we are feeling invaded, when we are feeling unwelcome, when our traumas have been reignited again, so there's like this huge collective trauma, like in one way or another. And it's so odd because if you look at Ceres from a perspective of attachment styles, because she does tell you something about how we attach to each other, you can see there's this classic, well, there's 4 attachment styles, but like secure is the 4th. And then there's the 2 major ones. One can be categorized into avoidant, can be categorized into 2 different, and then anxious attachment style. And these 2 tend to like plus and minus get sucked in together. And one is kind of like pulling back and the other one is running after. And that kind of thing, like that we are becoming conscious of what that means and how we attach to life in general. Are we becoming anxious for all, like, or are we just avoiding it, sticking our head in the sand? And and how does that affect our relationships? How does that give us what we need? It's more or less like a story of trauma and of fear of not having enough. And I think that fear of not having enough is basically because, well, ah, because we live in the system that we do, and it's not in accordance to sacred law, the law of distribution. The law of distribution would say there's enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. And it was the late Dawn Drogi who mentioned, I love her work on Ceres. Inner Wheel is her blog, and it's still up and running. There's some great articles about Pluto and Ceres on that site still. And she inspired a lot of my own thinking around this planet. And she mentioned that Ceres has no, she's a very moody goddess. She has no patience for greed. right? So it feels to me like there is no room for greed in nature, right? There is, because that's not how nature operates.
In that way. Yeah.
Huh? So there's like so I think now we are coming to kind of like a lot of this denial around environmental changes and the effect of our, um, we need to live. We can't starve. We have to use nature in a way as well in order to survive, right? But it's just that we haven't really figured it out yet.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that I think about when I just contemplate just the energy of this series Pluto cycle in Capricorn, um,
Mm,
I think there's so many examples, some of which you've touched upon, where Capricorn is in its essence the nature. It's just like the ground of not our understanding of nature, but it's actually like the structure of nature itself. And we may or may not be living in harmony or in alignment with that. We depend on whatever structures we've determined as being important. So we have structures of government. We have the systems of
mm,
how we form communities, right? How we organize ourselves as human beings. There's been such a prevalent theme around how are we going to depend upon the structures that we value and that we believe are necessary for our existence during times of pain and crisis and loss. And so we have a lot of, I'm depending on the government, or the government maybe is falling short and isn't giving me the things that I need.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The sources of security and the authority figures, the sources of mature parental providing, maybe being absent or needing to make adjustments to provide in new different ways. Or you mentioned
Mm,
people turning more towards nature and health. I think there's been this essential adjustment around the reliable and stable structures that we depend upon to give order and
mm,
guidance and stability to our lives. Either those
mm,
structures haven't been there, or we've
mm,
needed to cope and find new ways to depend on structure, new structures, new
mm,
forms of being protected and guided and supported because of the absence of something that's reliable. And we can think of this, I think this started, with the Libra Aries axis, this year at least being very emphasized. I think a core theme of this and what's most alive for many souls is in our own relationships, our work, and the
mm.
roles
Yeah,
that we're
yeah, yeah.
playing. Either we are failing to provide the responsibilities and roles that others are expecting or needing of us, or that which we're expecting or depending upon from others.
Mm,
It's like we might find in our relationships a lack of the kind of dependability that we depend upon for, I'm expecting this from you and you're expecting this from me. What about when that can't be given, when that can't be provided? So how do we
mm,
rearrange? How do we structure our lives in a new way when those otherwise normal systems of dependability aren't actually available?
mm,
So, seeing them coming together now at culminating this Capricorn, at the culmination of Pluto, to me, it just intuitively really, really highlights there's a very stark ending to the conditioned forms of structure and systems that we've depended upon, that we've been conditioned to be, who we've known ourselves
mm,
to be, the roles that we're supposed to play, what we're expecting from government, what we're expecting
mm,
from other people. There's a very stark culmination happening, and this new cycle is beginning at the very, very beginning of Aquarius. Like
mm.
it's very, what's the word that I want to use? It's expressive. It's very rich and palpable,
It's
right?
very rich, it's very powerful. And thinking about that 0 degree Aquarius point, it's a very interesting point for the time being, because that was also the new phase of Jupiter Saturn not long ago, the new
Oh,
cycle
interesting.
between these
Yeah.
two. Yeah, yeah, I think even there was a Mars Venus cycle there as well. It's like
There was
there's
at the
like,
beginning of the year. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was there's it's like a very busy place, just after that 29th degree of Capricorn, there's like 0 degrees Aquarius and Pluto is entering, and there's something new coming. And I think what you say there, my thoughts around these like nodal axes, and also reflecting back on my own life and how I've seen the life of others, and the client work that I do, and And this axis of like South Node in Libra, this very codependent thing where we are like, you didn't give me that, like the South Node always is the burning ground for karmas that haven't been resolved yet. So it's like when it comes to like the downside of Libra, it's our codependent or need for other people's approval or people pleasing and all these things that where we tend to kind of that we act on when we have lost our center, our sense of self. And through that Aries North Node, I think we've all been catapulted into a more independent way of seeing things, more independence, more taking more charge of our own lives. As you say, you can't depend on culture always, and that's true. You can't always depend on that culture. And the funny thing, I delve into the Sabian symbols. I don't know if you do that, but the it's very interesting. This 29th, or it's called the 30th degree of Capricorn. When you look at the Sabians, you always go up a degree, and it's called like a secret meeting among men. Like like this secret assembly, like it almost gives you the vibe of some sort of like secrecy. Ceres is very much about our governments, to be quite honest, because
Mm.
the government's job is to provide. They
Okay.
are actually employed by their people through the tax.
Mm.
We pay them.
Is that a series in Capricorn, or would you say series as a general archetype?
General archetype. You see her very often, like for instance, Red Cross. If you pull up the chart for the Red Cross, there's a very prominent series.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like I'm distributing food,
Right.
like I'm here helping people in
In the
need.
context of devastation, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. There's been a loss. Here's like a surrogate mother. You see her also in the charts of birth mothers. Like they tend to have strong Ceres connections, like, and also a little bit of Pluto. Imagine how many times they save lives while helping women to give birth. So birth and death has always been very tightly connected. And so there's like this, like people who have a strong Ceres often take on this role of being like a mother for everyone, like there's no limit to the mothering, to be quite honest. It's not limited to your own family. It's more like a way of being, like there's like, and that's how our governments should be, like in a way, Capricorn is a feminine yin sign. It is a feminine sign, even though we tend to, Saturn is more like masculine, but Capricorn itself is feminine. And our institutions, hospitals, schools,
Amazing.
anything's provided for in our society, a general sense of safety. And just a little fun fact around that, the United States chart, which is interesting because you don't have public health care.
Yeah.
Ceres is in Pisces, and Pisces, Ceres, when Ceres and Neptune come together, you have that aspect of neglect. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
oh, I forgot that you were ill. You can just leave, you know, and it
Love that.
squares Uranus
Mm.
on top of it. So there's like
You're on this in
this,
what sign?
it's in, Ceres is in Pisces, 8 degrees Pisces, and I think Uranus is also at 8 degrees Gemini. So there's a
Oh, okay.
square between these two.
Oh, that's fascinating. Hmm.
It's fascinating because especially because you live in the United States, how stressful it must be to, I mean, like I sometimes think about that, how it's what you're going to pay like $8,000 just because you had like
Okay. I'm
something
gonna put in
happen
the
to your
link in the
body.
description. There's this amazing South Park clip. Maybe you've seen it.
I hope.
Making fun of the American healthcare system. It's hilarious. And
Yeah.
that, and I'll describe it, but what you just described with that square, let me illustrate this. So they're trying to get meds for obesity medication for Cartman, and it's like this whole runaround. You gotta get even explaining it feels confusing to me. But the clip beautifully expresses it. It's basically an impossible situation,
Yeah.
and you have to know how to you have to study and know how to work the system to get the system to work for you. Okay,
Mm,
so the dynamic is this is what comes to mind: Ceres in Pisces squaring
mm,
Uranus in Gemini.
mm,
The sort of the atrophication of that provision and that care. It's not developed. And so there's a sort of innocent, I'm depending on something, but I actually don't know where to find it or how to get it. And that square to Uranus
Mm.
is this mental traffic jam. It's like the mind trying to organize and map out a system that you really can't grab onto in the first place. It's like you can't actually, no one really knows where to find it or how to get it. And it just takes ongoing mental gymnastics. So it feels really illustrative of this seeming karma in this
Mm.
country around
Mm.
healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah, and add the moon in Aquarius on top of it for the people,
Right. Oh,
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, because there is a level of trauma when you are on your own like that, and it could probably, you could end up being bankrupt because you have to go to the doctor, or you're just left on your own if you don't have an insurance. And an insurance, the way that I understand it, is not for everyone. It's too expensive. So it's kind of like this like the Ceres this responsibility of the government is to provide. It's part being Ceres, and it has to do with that law of distribution, which is a sacred law. Nobody should be allowed to have more than, inherit more than, well, a certain sum of money. Money should be distributed equally so that everybody has, of course, I mean, there will be individual differences, but everybody should have, so that they don't have to lie awake feeling completely traumatized because they don't know how to survive. And even if they're working 3 jobs, it's not because they're lazy.
I mean, and this specifically to me feels very serious Capricorn. I mean, just like the
Yeah.
stress, burden, and the weight of your socio-economic reality and all the stress and effort that's required,
Mm.
right? And so it's like the Ceres and Capricorn archetype in one extreme can be understood as, the single parent that has to run 3 jobs just to,
Mm.
and then their car breaks down and suddenly they don't have enough to pay their rent. Is there's underneath that a wellspring of emotion. Right?
Mm. Oh, yeah.
There's just the grief and the pain
The
of
grief and the pain, yeah.
one's conditions. And it's almost like one more thought on this Capricorn cycle that we're completing. I think things don't change often if we're not able to really access the grief. Right? So we can just sort of be in this trauma place of coping
Mm.
with loss and taking responsibility for the things that we need to do
Mm.
without ever having really process and from what you shared with me last time, Ceres really lost it. I mean,
Yeah, we
and
totally
that
lost it.
archetype also can be incredibly possessive, very intense and
Mm.
emotionally intense too. And I see in the world many a resurgence of the knowledge, the wisdom, and the intelligence of emotion, the intelligence of grief
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
for all people. It's like
yeah,
more
yeah,
and
yeah.
more people are doing grief circles, men's grief circles, women's grief
Yes.
circles, um, grief circles for different races, different nationality. It's like we're starting to appreciate that there's been this missing piece in this
Mm.
long history of human trauma.
Mm.
And that
Absolutely.
really feels like, yeah, that's what it's like for Pluto and Ceres to be coming together. It's like we've been losing and losing and so much pain, all of
Mm.
us collectively, not
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
us,
yeah, yeah.
hasn't. And so we're learning we need to be able to process this emotionally.
Because the compensations are so incredibly unhealthy. When we compensate, when we suppress, when we compensate for a deep connection with ourselves by becoming extremely rich or doing something, like when we run away from our traumas, we see the massive damage that has on our societies. That is cultures being destroyed by dictators and any weird psychopaths who are just evidently clearly should go to therapy. Like, it's evident for all of us that this guy or this human needs some help, because, like, how can you be that angry with somebody who hasn't done anything to you, for instance, when it comes to these extreme racial issues that we have? And like, it's all these projected things that comes up when we are not dealing with ourselves on that deep level, that is really, really destroying individuals, families, and cultures. And, like, for instance, like, not George no Donald Trump. because Donald Trump has been very like for me, I sit across the Atlantic and been having like this. I know it's right now it's a little difficult to talk politics in general because it kind of like it's so polarizing. But if we just think of him as a human being and we know a little bit about his upbringing, he's got a Pluto opposition series in his chart. Pluto is in it's pretty tight as well. Pluto is in Leo and Ceres is in Aquarius. And he's kind of not seen the value of psychotherapy and you working on yourself. And he's been, expressing publicly that, not, I better deal with it on your own. He was sent very early to military school, and he had an upbringing that kind of reveals that it wasn't easy. His big brother died of alcoholism. His mother, like, there was this big, huge shame about them not being, he wasn't second generation wealth. He was just like a first generation wealth type of person. And so there's been like this overcompensation for that. Imagine it's opposite Pluto in Leo. And he rarely mentions his own mother. His mother was this very poor girl. His mother was this very poor immigrant from Scotland, actually, who came to the United States as a young woman and married Fred Trump, his father, a real estate agent or a real estater, and they became very, very rich. But in terms of I don't know. There you are. In terms of warmth, emotional warmth, for instance, one aspect of Ceres in Aquarius, we know Aquarius can be pretty detached. Because you have Ceres in Aquarius doesn't mean that you have lack of warmth in the parental connection between you and your parents or between you and your children. It doesn't mean that, but it can mean that, because Uranus and Aquarius is always related to some sort of detachment. And according to most biographies, like, he always spoke well of his mother, but according to those people who knew him, there weren't much connection. Like,
Was a
there was
bond,
a
right?
disconnection. Yeah. Like the bond, the emotional bond, the oxytocin of the relationship,
Mm.
this intimate part, the hugging,
Aquarius corresponding to severing, right? And
yeah, yeah, severing. Yeah, yeah. Uranus corresponds to severing. So when you see your Ceres with, particularly, it's tough when Ceres are in aspect to the outer planets naturally, because they tend to have such massive influence in our own lives, things that are beyond our control. We can't seem to control it, like it's beyond our ego. It just happens to us in a way. And that severing is hard for people, when you don't have that connection with the mother. And most psychologists and psychiatrists and people who work in the mental health department would say that it's very important for our sense of safety and security to have a good, nourishing bond with the mother. The father as well, but particularly the mother. She's the breasts, she's the provider, she's the nurturer, she's the kind of like, she's the milk, she's the actual nourishment. Right. So I think a lot about that, because there's like this, like, what's the difference between Ceres and the moon? It makes more sense to me that Ceres becomes even more like a nurturing quality than the moon itself. I believe when you look at them together in the chart, you can get a real specific like image of the mother, how
Well,
that
it's like,
nurturing was perceived.
the moon on its own isn't going to implicitly speak to this archetype of loss and grief. Right? So I think in
Exactly.
the most general
True,
sense,
true,
the
true.
moon is how we're going to be emotionally integrating experience, and it's like the ground of our need as a human being to be cared for and to nurture. But what you're bringing forward with Ceres here is, when you think of Ceres with the moon, you're adding this really important dimension, which is sometimes that provisions or those dynamics aren't available, and thus the forms of mothering and nurturing may not be biological, may not
Mm,
come from the sources that it may not come from the breasts, it may not come from the sources that we've been dependent upon. And I think tension between Ceres and the moon might be something to think about in that regard.
mm.
right? Where there might be just difficulties or challenges around that core source of provision and nurturance. Something I got in my own chart. It's a very explicit. It's actually very direct correlation that I can contemplate for myself.
Well,
So,
we can look at some charts. I have a few charts that where we can look a little bit
sure.
at the
Well,
relationship.
before we do that, I want to take a moment to kind of ground us in just
Hmm.
defining what, how would we define the essence of Ceres and Aquarius? And I want to just share the chart again,
Hmm.
just to give us a sense of, you know, it, noting Saturn was there, by the way, during that last conjunction. I'm just
Mm.
appreciating that. Literally in December, Saturn will then move into an exact semi-square, 45 degrees. And this series conjunction is also happening with Venus there. And, we spoke about the moon. Venus, of course, corresponding to our relationship needs and our feelings. I think
Mm.
there's a lot going on over here in the imprinting in the beginning of this cycle that relate to this, how we're going to be integrating our core needs and dealing with our life as it is, starting this new cycle, but in Aquarius. So I have some thoughts in it, but I would love to hear how would you define the Ceres in Aquarius archetype? When I just wanted to highlight the signatures, it's trining the South Node. So there can be a lot of conscious integration here. We got that semi-square to Saturn, and of course, it's a part of this Pluto Mars opposition as well.
Mm. Yeah.
I
Well.
wanted everyone to see that. So yeah,
Mm.
I would love to hear your how you would define the essence of this.
Well, the essence of your series in Aquarius, I have it myself, and it's like I grew up being given a lot of freedom.
Mm,
That was part of my mother's capacity when, like, being a mother to me, she realized, oh, I think these girls need a need a lot of freedom. She also told me I was hard to raise. You kind of raised yourself, she said.
mm.
And she also has this Ceres in Aquarius, and it's conjunct my Ceres, so we're very tied to each other in a way.
What house is your series in?
That is will be in my second house.
Oh, yeah, okay, so it's very self-reliant. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, well, it adds, like, it is very self-reliant also, Aquarius. It's independent, and you look at the whole thing you just showed us now. I think we're coming to a phase in our own development where we are really freeing ourselves from expectations and becoming more autonomous when it comes to our core needs, not expecting others to provide for them, but seeing more where we can find a balance between us providing for ourselves, what do I want? Like being really capable of nurturing your individuality and your independence. For me, Aquarius is the sign of, well, of individuation. This is where you know, the polarity point to Aquarius is Leo. Leo is the heart. When you listen to your heart, you will find your true self, right? So there is this breaking of free from the norms and expectation, and a real emphasis on being able to listen to the heart and just follow that and trust that in order to get to where you really feel nourished by life.
Mm,
We can't live in these jobs where we don't feel inspired for a length of time if we really burn out by having these jobs. And it depends on, of course, the evolutionary level, but at one point, not listening to yourself will be basically impossible after a while. So I believe that this can be there's like the shadow side of Aquarius is very much what we talked about, the severance, the traumas, the disconnect. It's also about society, and it's like the the technocracy. Everything is so
right.
technical right now, and we are being distanced from each other through
Right.
that.
Huh.
And so we're starting a new cycle with these two in Aquarius, and I think that's also going to make us. I just had this discussion with my daughter because it has something to do with their phones and being all behind their phones all the time. And then my son is up north right now, and they've been, he's in the Navy, so they can't really use their phones. And he said, because of the danger of security breaches. And then he said, "It's really nice, Mom. It's
Mm,
like we talk together." And I'm like, there you go. There will be a counterculture to this disconnect that we are seeing more and more and more and more. And I think this next cycle between Pluto and Ceres, which is not the last one happening in Aquarius, where we are now learning to think more for ourselves, listen more to what we need. And we're also becoming well aware of the disconnect between each other. Like this is like, that might also be part of that theme when Ceres moves through Aquarius, is that, God damn it, this is so lonely. I am not finding any nurturance to my brain, to my soul, to my heart here. Where are my people? So you might have people going through like this experience of being disconnected from their the vibe, the tribe thing. And then on the other hand, you might have people just like, oh my God, these are the people that I really like. These are the people, this is where I belong. That's where I can find, I call myself, this is my spiritual home. This is where I can really connect with my true individual needs, my specialized needs, you might say.
Amazing. So, right, I have a couple thoughts
Hmm.
regarding that last point. This is actually what I think of when I think about all the grief rituals and communities coming together in ceremony in a way where we are learning the higher intelligence of emotion, the
Mm.
higher intelligence of processing loss. There's been such an isolation quality. But it's like Aquarius in some ways is like going forward, but if you go forward enough, you're kind of going backwards too, to how things
Mm.
used to be a long time ago
Yeah.
before we began living in these
Yeah.
more, I'm just going to think of me and myself kind of way of living,
Mm.
that everything's held in the space of community. So I think there's going to be more and more of a reemergence of that. And you mentioned your son being in the Navy. There are these rehab centers here in the States. I'm sure this is probably a general characteristic of rehab centers. For those recovering from addiction, they go out in nature. They learn to
Mm.
work together. They develop friendship. Like the
Yeah,
core
beautiful.
structure of it is the
Mm.
cultivation of friendship and accountability to one another. And there are
Hmm.
no phones. You don't get to be on your phone.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's almost like we need these extremes to then bring us into a place of actually just being more human and
Mm.
relational and communal with one another. Like it takes extreme loss to bring people together for a funeral, right? It brings extreme loss for people to come together and grieve. It takes extreme loss for people to go to a
Mm.
place, a farm in the middle of nowhere, to be
Mm.
without their phones, to learn how to build things and grow food with other people that are also healing. There's something about getting more real about we have to be together in these better ways. And I think
Mm.
the trap can be that dissociative, like the bleak,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
dissociative, dry quality of. Um, I, I made a recent video, and I think someone accused it of being. I'm not sure what they were describing as AI. Maybe they thought my cover photo was AI generated. Like it wasn't AI
Yeah.
generated. I picked the colors. I designed it. You really can't know what's authentic or what's real or what's
Yeah.
human because there's so much artificial creation happening right now. So I'm
Mm.
thinking of
And,
series. Yes,
oh yeah, no, I just wanted to say something. This is the first of probably four, because
I
it's
was
like,
thinking. Yeah, probably four.
yeah,
Yeah,
probably four conjunctions between Ceres and Pluto in Aquarius. And it's also one very, very pivotal point to remember is that if you look at the outer planets for the time being, it's like what, 26 Uranus, 27 Neptune, 29 Capricorn. They're all at this breathing out thing.
right.
They're like breathing out a whole era. And it's you get this feeling right now. There's like almost like a collective depression going on where people are like, well, there's no like we're waiting for these new visions. So the first round of this Pluto Ceres conjunction is going to happen when we are in between that age and this age,
Right.
like we're like, and there is a shift, with series is always this like, oh, no, there's a new chapter here of what story. It's a beginning story, but there's like also happening this cultural death, if you like. And so we might have some new visions about how we can create better societies and better friendships and a life that is more where we are more belonging in a way instead of disconnected.
Coming out of this Capricorn cycle, I think a part of what's difficult, but where we're
Mm.
learning to make some adjustments is we need to find different ways. So maybe the familial or social or, community structures that we've been living in have their, like I like to say, I walk down the street and it just blows me away thinking about how many bathrooms I'm passing, how many toilets I'm passing in a
Yeah.
5 minute walk, and I
Yeah.
gotta go. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I've just passed probably 200 individual toilets in like
And
one
people
block
use
of walking,
it.
right? And meanwhile, like I don't know what to do with myself. Like there's this like
Mm.
this if you think about it, it's kind of absurd.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is the
Yeah, sure, sure,
structure of
sure.
how we live. And
Mm.
so I think the grief and the pain of, I would say, where things simply aren't working. And this coming back to the whole Libra axis, and I think there's potentially, now that we've gone from these really strong Pluto series squares, for the past year and a half, there's been these
Yeah, it's
squares to
been
the nodes.
intense, huh?
It's
Super
important for us to
intense.
appreciate that, right? It's like we're moving into a trie now.
Mm. Which is better.
At the culmination, at the very end for the nodes, the very end is the
Mm.
very beginning of the Libra Aries axis in 2 1 2.
Mm.
So I think there's something to say around, hey, I never ended up being this thing that you needed me to be. Or I try to play this role in my profession and it's just not who I am.
Mm.
I'm trying to belong and show up in these ways and it's just not. Or other people haven't really been able to provide the needs that I've needed, or I've been depending on my community for these things to get me, to understand me, to, right? And it's just not working. There's some sense of what does it look like to, and this is a very Aquarian thing, stop trying to fit a square in a circle hole, let everything be as it is without
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
condition it according to some kind of, I really wanted it to work out this way and this way. And well, that means maybe your idea of belonging or your idea of this relationship or your idea of this community, these things might change. And I
Mm.
think what's hard is it's not what we wanted, or it's not providing, it's not giving, or we're not able to provide in the ways that we are really trying to be. But what's actually happening is we're allowing for the innate individuality, like what
Yeah,
is when
exactly.
you stop trying, the intelligence of life itself to organize in better and more intelligent and useful ways. So I think
Yeah.
there are ways of doing life as a human being and thus coming together where needs are provided. But I think this might be tender, necessarily. And I'm, again, thinking about, I'll share this chart again just to highlight what I'm speaking to. I'm appreciating that we have, this trine to the nodes simultaneous to all of that because, in a sense, like that makes it a little more like we can consciously integrate that and work with that, and Venus is really involved. But that semi-square to Saturn, in many ways, is a disillusionment of the roles and the structures and the value and the
Yeah, yeah.
investments that we put into life.
Mm.
And I have to make this red. By no means will I make this a blue line.
Yeah, and also
The
that semi-square, it's
opposition.
the
Yeah, please.
the waxing semi-square to Saturn is also a very like walking around a little bit blindly,
Right.
trying to kind of like process where the road is going because it's just a new cycle and we're still not there. I mean, I think we are still waiting for that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries and
Exactly. Yeah.
Uranus into Gemini before we really get like an understanding of where society is about to where we're moving. And because it looks like we've gone through some emotional purgatory the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been in many ways very healing because I think people really, got out of denial and stuff like that. And what you said there um, about, having a more individualized expression, how do we do that without hurting each other? Like right now, the debate with, one of the hot potato debates of Pluto, especially in Capricorn, not to digress too much, but it has been about, or like the whole last cycle, it has been about what you can and cannot say. And then
Right.
the
Right.
cancellation police has been becoming there's censorship now. We've gotten to that point, and that's not too good either. How do
Is
we
that
live?
prevalent in Europe as much as it is in the States?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, depending on country, I think, like it depends on culture, what is allowed and not allowed to say out loud, what is allowed and not allowed to do. Like, for instance, like some countries will not see gently upon homosexuality or gay gender stuff. Other countries are very cool about it, but, it's more like some sort of trouble in the underground there, or like there's like fragments of society that doesn't accept it. But yeah, this kind of like censorship thing it's not in accordance with the true nature of Aquarius, right? It's not like, but we have to kind of understand as well that we are not just talking to ourselves. And I think the beauty with Aquarius is that there's an understanding of the group, of groups, of different groups. Like you talk to all the people, not just one group of the people. What is uniting us? And I would think that from a Ceres perspective, that is more interesting. How can you embrace the individuality of others? Because that would be part of your nurturance to the world. Yes, like I disagree with you, but like if that's your thing, I'm going to support you. Like how can we really truly be safe if we can't be free to express ourselves the way we are?
This is such an essential component of Ceres with Pluto right now. I need to start wrapping up, but I wanted to
Yeah,
just speak to
yeah,
a couple points here. So it's important to just bring in this Mars opposition because like you're saying, like there can be a lot of divisiveness.
mm,
You don't belong, right? I mean that's the grief, the trauma of Ceres with Pluto and Aquarius is like, hey, you don't belong. That's not
mm,
acceptable in this community. You're different, or it's like this community, but not that community, right? A lot of divisiveness, and actually, I think it's important to feel this dark pain because this brings divisions amongst families. I mean, people and friends, right? There can be a lot
mm.
of unnecessary, I can't be your friend. But I think the healing of that is meeting that inside of ourselves. We're actually just dividing ourselves from our own selves, from the universal community that lives on the inside. And there's a way to be with our differences without being so threatened. It's almost like I don't feel safe if you're that different than me.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the
exactly.
danger that we really need to all be mindful of, because this is a very volatile time with Mars opposite, there can be a lot of pride and righteousness here of, yeah, you're different and I'm going to protect or defend myself, and a sort of pridefulness around what I believe is important and worthy and valuable, but you and how you're living or this group is not. So I think we need to really be mindful of within ourselves and just watching in the world unnecessary divisiveness and defensiveness and violence, right? Relative to groups of people and my cause and my purpose is more important than yours. One of the
Mm,
things that is a deep, it's a sensitive place for me, as a Jew,
mm,
and I work in the local synagogue. Naturally, the local synagogue speaks a lot about what's happening in Israel and Gaza, but the primary orientation in this Jewish community is, mourning the loss of the Israelis, the Jewish lives, and wanting the hostages back. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually, it's deeply tender, and I have family in Israel and friends. I mean, this is a very tender space, but I
mm.
can't stop there. Like
No,
and I see other people that are then very much like
yeah,
speaking out against the loss of life in Gaza and what's happening there, and it's almost like to a lot of people it's like, yeah, but what about all these people that were killed on October 7th? And it's like, yeah, but that's not as many people. It's like a lot of unnecessary, like
yeah,
this
yeah,
is more important than this, but like, yeah, but this is, you know and
yeah.
I
There,
think
there,
we
there's
can
a
get
deep.
lost in all of these kinds of like whose grief or which community or which loss is more important. And there's a great quote from Charles Eisenstein, like the actual stories of war, the actual stories, right, get lost in our narratives of them.
Mm,
Like one mother who's lost a child is an authentic, real story worth immense compassion and grief and pain and empathy. And then we go into, yeah, well, here are all these justifications or Capricorn historical rationales, or here's how this started, or here's who did it first. I think there's a loss of humanity in what I'm seeing in the world where a lot of people are having difficulty appreciating that there's a humanity to the grief and the mourning and the loss. And there's something about being able to appreciate and value the dignity and the importance of each individual in their own personal experience. Like, we all come from different communities, we all come from a different background. And that's like the beauty of Aquarius. And one thing that I've been loving, I love it, I'm obsessed with it, and I want everyone to do this as well. Watching and finding videos where Palestinians and Israelis or Arabs and Jews get together. And it sometimes it's getting together to express why they don't trust each other, getting together to express why they're justified. And trust me, there are more than enough justifications on both sides. Or it's getting together to talk about, the losses they both experience and to grieve together. It's like, that's what the world needs. And, talk about the mother archetype. Michelle, I think, had this vision once of there won't be peace until the mothers begin getting together. And that feels very Ceres, because it's like, I care about your child. This is not my biological child, but
Mm.
I'm coming to, because I'm also a mother, or I'm also a parent, or I also care. And it doesn't matter where you come from or what the history is or anything. I care that you've experienced this loss. Until we can relate to each other in that way, I don't really think there's going to be ever long-lasting peace anywhere in the world.
Well, there you go. I mean, really, empathy and being a mother and being mothering to each other and nurturing each other. I mean, I remember when the war in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was so angry. I was infuriated. I was like, why? We just came out of COVID, and this is the last thing the world needs now. Another one of your stupid wars. Fuck that. Like as a mother, I could say that out loud. Do you know how many soldiers will bleed out because there's some moron who needs therapy who's like taking them out of their lives and putting them into wars? And there are mothers crying for their sons and fathers too, of course. But the whole idea of war for me is just like, it's so primitive. And the loss and the trauma and the price we pay for it is so high. The trauma that, the Jews endured during the Second World War, it hasn't been healed yet, you know? This is like ancestral wounds. And it's such a huge, complicated issue. When we look at world politics today, there's like so many nuances and so many perspective, and you can get lost in that. But when you kind of get back to the essence of it, is that, you know what? I've been thinking, I have this beautiful new kitchen now in my house because I redid it recently. And while I was doing that, I was thinking of the Ukrainian mothers who were in their kitchens, finally got a new kitchen, and then boom, suddenly it's gone. And that's the thing. Most of us are just trying to get on with our lives. Most of us wants to create something beautiful together with other people. But now we're being trained to hate each other. We're being trained to be part of a polarity. We're being trained to take part of a war that is not by far our war. We might have like cultural preferences or believe something like that, or like fall into the whole drama of it all and have opinions. Not that we know answers, but the world is suddenly, all of us are experts on something right now. And that's an ego thing, you want to be right. But there's no wrong and right from the laws of nature. It's just what you need to do. That's the smart thing to do if you want to create a stable and healthy and safe society. So by all means, I think we should all be listening a little bit more to the Great Mother. Because I'm pissed, like that's the only word I can say. It's like I'm sick and tired. There's so many other problems on this planet. And when are we going to figure out how to live together? Because it's not like we can annihilate someone. We can't just, you know, we can't do that. And I think, with Pluto, with Ceres in Aquarius now, maybe we'll find out how to work together as a group. Hopefully, we're going to have 4 times of Pluto Ceres now. And that's the aspiration of that transit. There's these lower vibes to it, of course, where we have all these problems within groups And then there's the higher one where we find together as one humanity. I know I'm a little bit hippie in my mind, but I'd rather be that than to not believe in anything at all.
All right, well, I gotta get going. So
I
this
know.
has been really amazing and really insightful, and maybe we can continue this exploration during other peak series transits down the road. So,
Hmm.
so how can people reach out and find you?
Oh, well, I'm on Instagram as Polaris Astrology. This is probably where I update most of my stuff. I'm also, well, I do have a channel on YouTube, which is also Polaris Astrology. I'm not very, I'm not very good at putting things out
You
there.
should start doing stuff there,
So
in my opinion.
good, I should. But I'm a mother and I have cats and kids
So
and chaos.
series in Aquarius, more nurturing through astrology. We're gonna
More,
find
yeah, yeah,
more
yeah.
community, more astrology, really getting benefit from that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you are a series in Aquarius. I am too. Okay, great. So I'll put all the links to that as
Yes.
well. And you're available for sessions, correct? Do you do
Yes.
that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. I am as well, and I'll put my links. I have a free Planet Squaring the Lunar Nodes class series coming up this Sunday.
Oh,
Check it out, and I'll put that in the description below. And
lovely to see
thank
you
you so much.
again, Ari.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. Until next time.
Yes.